That was 1 minute, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me be clear. The Democratic Party does not believe that the government should control the means of production. No Democrat believes that there should be government gas stations or government technology companies or government car companies. So what does the Democratic Party believe? We believe every person in America should have child care. And what is the Republicans? What do they say? Their answer, well, look at how many people Stalin killed. We say, let's give everyone health care. The Republicans say, well, we can't do that. Look at how many people Pol Pot killed. We say, let's make sure everyone has equal opportunity. The Republican plan, we can't do that. Look at how many people Kim Jong-un is starving. Give me a break. The American people are catching on. They know that we have lost 25% of wealth in the working class and middle class since 1980. They know that the real crime are not crimes happening abroad, but the crime of paying starvation wages for hard work. This party is actually solving the problems of the American people. That party is giving rhetoric about foreign regimes. People will see through the rhetoric and side with the Democratic Party.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we have a tendency in this place to always run down everything Congress does or that Washington does. I would submit that our response as a nation to the pandemic is one of the most extraordinary responses on a bipartisan basis that this country has ever had. We had 22 million people out of work with the pandemic. Most other nations around the world followed austerity politics. They didn't have enough aid. We spent, on a bipartisan basis, $5 trillion to make sure that millions of people got back to work, to make sure that we have a 3.5% unemployment rate, not a 10% employment rate, to make sure that we didn't have a depression in this country, to make sure that 6 million people didn't go into poverty. That was what unemployment insurance extension was about. We voted not because it was going to help red states or blue states. We voted because it was going to help the United States of America. And we learned the lesson of the Great Recession, that the stimulus then, which the Republicans opposed, was actually too small, that we needed to go bigger. And the person who realized that was not just the Republicans, it was Donald Trump. $3.3 trillion of the spending we're talking about was Trump-oriented spending. My first question to you is, what percent of fraud are we talking about on the $5 trillion? Is it less than 2%, 3%? I mean, what percent are we talking about?
Congressman, at this point, I'm not in a position to tell you
Ballpark.
precise. I have no idea at this point.
You don't know? Is it less than 50%?
It's less than 50%.
Is it less than 10%?
There are some programs. I'm not sure where.
Overall, are you saying there's a possibility?
We have a lot of investigating going on, so I'm not going to make a guesstimate when I don't really have a.
Does anyone have a sense if it's less than 10%? 5%? You have no idea what percent?
There are still hundreds of cases that are being investigated. So
well, let me ask this. Is there any evidence that the fraud is higher on the $1.8 trillion that was allocated under President Biden's rescue plan as opposed to the $3.3 trillion that President Trump signed off on the CARES Act? There's no evidence of that, right? I mean, the fraud was equally applicable potentially to the $3.3 trillion as the $1.8 trillion. Is that a fair statement?
I'd say that's a fair statement.
And Mr. Horowitz?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
The breakdown of our criminal investigations is roughly 45% UI-based and the other 55% SBA, but that's just a Secret Service context, just to give you what we have open.
No, but the UI was extended under the CARES Act when President Trump was president. And by the way, the Democrats objected back then to a lot of the deregulation on SBA and a lot of the deregulation on how that was administered. But I just want to be clear, because they're trying to imply that somehow this fraud, which in my view is it's less than 2 to 3%. I mean, you can't say it, but even if you think that it was $100 billion, that's still less than a couple percent of the total spending. They're trying to imply that somehow President Biden is to blame for that. And that, you would agree, is just not factual, correct? I mean, you can't blame President Biden and not blame President Trump when 3.3 trillion of it was under Trump. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at the totality of the programs from 2020 to the current day, and we're finding problems across that whole spectrum.
Mr. Horwitz?
Yes, the fraud began in March 2020. We're looking at fraud cases throughout. Most of the money went out in the earlier periods of time, but there's fraud throughout.
That's a great point. Most went out earlier. So if anything, the Trump administration probably is more to blame for that 3% of the fraud. Let me ask this to Mr. Dodaro. One of the challenges has been the antiquated IT systems in many of these states prior to the pandemic. And this is actually one of the challenges with the unemployment claims. Could you compare Republican-led state performances on these IT systems versus Democratic states, or talk more generally about these IT systems?
Well, I can talk generally. I can't, we didn't look at it that way. We don't look at things on a partisan basis. But the IT systems, some of them date back to the 1970s from what we understand. There are efforts made to try to modernize them. You know, we keep a list of the highest risk areas. This is at the federal level for the federal government. IT acquisitions and operations on the high risk list government-wide for the federal government. At the state level, they were having similar problems, and that contributed to their inability to detect some of the fraud. They weren't able to do matching on some cases in some of the larger states, and with the volume of claims that came through, they needed to have automated processes. In some states, they were doing it manually, you know, visually, just trying to.
That was one of the big reasons for the fraud, right?
That was a contributing factor, yes. And the other contributing factor was self-certifications. And the self-certifications, I think, was one of the biggest contributing factors, where the people could just say, I'm eligible for this program. In some cases, they weren't allowed and not required to submit supporting documentation, so you just had to take people's word for it. And that's a prescription for fraud.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes.
Mr. Khanna has the time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. General Milley, I want to thank you for your distinguished service to our country, and I appreciate both you and Secretary Austin sticking around till 3 p.m., commitment to the democratic process. I would argue that the United States Department of Defense has been the most innovative institution probably in humanity over the last 50 years. When you look at what has come out of the Department of Defense, obviously things that have helped my district, the internet, the mouse, GPS, radar, stealth technology. I often joke with the entrepreneurs, I said, yeah, you commercialized it, but the Department of Defense invented it. And this has been the history of DARPA and other institutions. I want to make sure that we stay the most innovative Department of Defense. And to that point, Secretary Austin, I commend you for starting the Strategic Capabilities Fund, which is going to be investing in cutting-edge technology that could be disruptive. I guess I am puzzled, and maybe you can help and generally give us some guidance on how we solve this issue of getting funding to the Strategic Capabilities Fund and how we get more of the funding put into the purchase of advanced technology, not just the funding of the companies, but actually the acquisition, because we've got, you know, almost $1 trillion which we're heading in the defense budget. Here we're talking about a few $1 billion, and yet it seems hard to get that funding. And the challenge with China and others, as you know, is asymmetrical. They're not going to compete with us conventionally. So it seems to me very prudent that we take asymmetrical bets. And I just love I have one question. My question is just how do we get more of the acquisition into emerging technologies and asymmetrical approaches, and what can Congress do to help? And I love both Secretary Austin and General Milley's comments on it.
Well, we certainly worked hard to stand up this office because we think it's important to incentivize investors to help create the technology that we need. We've accounted for some of this in our budget. We're partnering with Small Business Bureau to make sure that we're pulling every lever We have initiatives such as Raider, which is incentivizes small businesses to come forward with the technology that we've said that we need to help the warfighters so that we can create relevant capability for the warfighters now. And so that has created things like, you know, you've heard us talk about Switchblade. That's been relevant for the Ukrainians in this fight over the last year. We're able to get that to the warfighters in really record time because of the initiatives like that. So we'll stay after this, but I agree with you. This is really, really important that we try to do everything we can to speed technology being introduced at scale where appropriate to support our warfighters.
General Milley?
Same thing. I think the importance of it is critical. As I've mentioned several times today, this change in the character of war is on us, and we are seeing the very rapid advance of a whole series of technologies that are going to fundamentally change how militaries fight. And it's not going to look like it did before. So the faster we get after this and the better we integrate these technologies into our military, the better off we're going to be against China or Russia or anybody else for that matter. So I think speed and sense of urgency is critical, and we need all the help we can get from Congress for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
It's actually more of a comment, and then I want to get your reaction to it. Over the many years now, I've seen the rhetoric and the partisanship in Congress get worse and worse and worse. You know, back in the whatever 80s, 90s, there used to be philosophical differences like abortion or taxes, but in general, it was fairly simple, right? Now we have people on both sides, right? Whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene shooting her mouth off, whether it's AOC calling Republicans fascist, whether it's Nancy Pelosi saying that if the Republicans take over the House, that it's going to be the end of democracy as we know it. When the rhetoric seems to get more hateful toward the other side. They're not just misguided politically anymore. They're like bad people, or they're evil, or whatever. And I'm just wondering, how do you think we got to this point, and how do you think we will get out of it?
I'll tell you my approach. I don't know if it will work fully, but people often ask me, well, how do you work with some Republicans who are the co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign, speak out for Medicare for all, and pre-public college? How is it that Republicans are willing to work with him on the CHIPS Act, or Senator Rubio willing to work on the National Development Council? And I have two simple principles. I never question anyone's patriotism, and I never question their motives. I try to win the argument based on the substance of the issue. And I think if we just got to that in this country, where we argue the substance, where we let reason be the force instead of hurling insults, then we would make much more progress. Because ultimately, if someone is elected and 700,000 people are sending them there, when you insult them, you're insulting all 700,000 people who voted for them. That doesn't mean you agree with them. That doesn't mean you concede anything. But win over folks by the force of your argument, by the force of your logic, by substance. And that's how I think if we could restore that sense in this country, to have conversations based on argument and reason instead of trying with a soundbite that goes viral, we would do much better in trying to find common ground or agreeing with respect. And that's why I'm so interested in these town halls. That to me is the essence of American democracy.
Donald from Fremont has a question on oil.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for this session. With respect to oil, we have an overall policy that we try to be environmentally friendly and be conscious and reduce the use of oil. But at the same time, when the prices are high and the other countries outside the US are using that against us as a weapon, then we need to be smart sometimes and sometimes produce more to reduce the price and get them also down. So sometimes it's okay to be tactically smart, but strategically still okay. What are your thoughts on that? Because we don't see those smart tactics with respect to counter the oil prices.
I propose that we ban the export of our refined oil until the prices fall. It's not a matter of production. Our production, if you look at it under President Biden, is at record levels. It's at record levels. It's higher than it was under the Trump administration. And when you look at the data, it's the myth that the president has cut production. And the issue is that one, we're exporting some of it, so why are we exporting it and allowing these big oil companies to make record profit? And two, why are they making record profits? We need to have a windfall profits tax on those profits and put that money back in the hands of consumers. I mean, they're profiting off the war in Ukraine, and they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So those would be my solutions to how we bring gas prices down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Attorney General Marshall, I want to see if we can find some common ground. I assume you would agree with me that if BlackRock or a company wanted to prioritize investments for things that were made in America, that would be okay.
The question is whether or not that's going to maximize the return for the investor in that fund.
But you wouldn't agree. I mean, I believe that it is fine for companies to prioritize goods made in America, made in Alabama, made in the United States, regardless of profit maximization. You would disagree with that?
I would disagree with that. The role of the fiduciary is to maximize the benefit for that individual for whom they represent.
Okay,
That
well,
is a sole, if I can finish, please, sir. It's a sole interest duty of loyalty that exists for that fiduciary. And if, in fact, investing in a company that produces American goods is not profitable, nor does it provide a return, then that individual will be acting contrary to their duty of loyalty to that particular investor.
Well, we just disagree with this. I think your view is more of a globalist view. I'd be curious what President Trump thinks, actually, because my view is that American investment firms should prioritize investing in making things in America. I thought that was half of the former president's campaign. So we just have a philosophical disagreement on that. Let me ask a second question. I assume you would be fine if BlackRock says, even though the vast majority of profit maximization would mean investing in China, which, by the way, they have said that's the highest returns, we're going to choose not to invest there because of the human rights violations of the Uyghurs. Would you be for them maximizing their profits and investing in China, or would you support them not investing in China because of human rights concerns?
Obviously, BlackRock has multiple investment vehicles for which people can choose. If, in fact, they have a global fund in which they are investing in China, then the investor has an opportunity to determine whether or not...
Would you say it's fair for BlackRock to make a decision that they should not invest in China, even if that's higher returns, because they have a problem with the human rights view and the Uyghurs?
I think the question is, what is the purpose of the fund? What is the defined investment goal that's there?
Yeah, they're
and then they can make a decision about whether or not it's appropriate return for that particular investor.
So if they made a decision, if Larry Fink said, we're not investing in China, in regions with the Xinjiang where there are Uyghurs, would you be fine with that?
Tell me again this.
Uyghurs are basically oppressed in China, and if BlackRock said we're not going to invest there because we're concerned about the human rights violations, would you be fine with that?
BlackRock has an opportunity to define the fund, how it would be invested, and how it is that they choose
so you would
for
be
those
fine
particular investors.
if they made a decision on human rights grounds, would you be fine with that?
It's a broader issue than that, Congressman.
Well, no,
as far
I'm just
as
asking.
sir, you're not letting
No,
me answer my
finish,
question.
'cause
You may have an agenda that you want to ask with this question,
No,
but what I'm answering for you
I
is,
reclaim my time. Let me ask you, Chairman Gallagher, I'm on the China Committee. We have had Republicans lecture BlackRock saying that they should have the values not to be investing in China, even if it's profit maximizing because of the human rights violations with the Uyghurs. Would you support that view?
first of all, I don't know exactly the circumstances that you're talking about in China.
That's shocking that you don't know the Uyghurs and the human rights violations there.
Can't tell you that I know anything about it, sir.
Well, I suggest maybe you should read up on it because it's a huge concern for America. But would you support that view? I mean, I'm just trying to say, where do you think values matter? Would you have supported the view that we should not be investing in Germany during World War II?
I think the issue for investment companies is whether or not they are finding that they are complying with their fiduciary
Attorney
duty.
General Marshall, I guess here's my point. Do you think there is ever a point that values of standing up against the human rights views of China, values of standing up against Nazism, values of standing up against Stalinism, do you believe there's ever a time that values should trump profit maximization?
They have the right to choose not to invest in companies that they believe create certain risks. That's what the market provides.
once you open that door, once you say that they have the right to, as you said, not invest in companies that have certain risks, or I would say companies that offend for certain fundamental human values, then the question is who gets to decide what those values are. And my view is it shouldn't be the government deciding what those values are. It shouldn't be you or I. It should be in the free market, these companies. If you're saying it's fine that they should not be investing in China, that they should not, with human rights violations, then what's the difference between that and a company that says they don't want to invest in something because of climate?
I don't believe that a small cabal of financial institutions ought to decide what are preferred societal values or global energy policy.
But that's not the case. The case is you're not even letting the cabal, you're not even letting them invest in America. And then you're telling them don't invest in China on the Uyghurs, and I hope you are, and then you're saying, though, that you're defining these values narrowly. Anyway, my time has expired.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much.
Recently, I traveled to Lordstown, Ohio, in Ashtabula County in Ohio, in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Farrell, Pennsylvania, and I saw steel mill after steel mill shut down, including in Cleveland and in Detroit and in Downriver, Michigan. Of the world's top 15 steel companies, China has 9, and the United States of America doesn't have a single one. How did we let this happen as a country? How did we decimate American steel, costing community after community so many good jobs, hurting urban centers with large African American working populations, and hurting factory towns across America? This was a colossal mistake. In the 1950s, we used to make over 50% of the world's steel. That's down to 2 or 3%. Today, China makes nearly 50% of the world's steel. This is a national security issue if we ever have to mobilize for our military. This is a climate issue. China's steel puts 3 times the emission into the atmosphere than American steel because we use electric arc furnaces and recycled material, unlike the blast furnaces that China does. It's time for America to have a strategy to bring steel production, modern steel production, back home. We can make steel that is cleaner, we can make steel that is at a higher quality, and we can revitalize towns like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, Lordstown, Ohio, Akron, Ohio, Downriver, Michigan, if we build these modern steel plants. I'm going to be working with colleagues on a bipartisan basis to introduce a Modern Steel Act, to say that the government should partner with our steel unions and with our steel companies to build modern steel in the United States of America. This will be clean steel with either hydrogen or electric arc furnaces. This will create good-paying jobs. This will be good for national security, and this will ensure that America leads in steel in the 21st century, not China. My friends, we made a big, big error in the United States of America, losing our lead in domestic production. It's time for our country to become a manufacturing superpower again. It's time to begin that with modern steel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Chair recognizes 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your bipartisan leadership on the committee. I will say, despite your efforts to make this as high-profile a committee, probably the most significant thing happening on U.S.-China relations today is not in the hearing, but Dr. Kissinger meeting Xi Jinping as we speak and meeting all the high-level leaders in China. And I say that because I think there's an area in the committee where there's clearly bipartisan agreement, and that is, as Congressman Lukemire has made the point, you've made the point, Congressman Whitman, others, we've hollowed out our industrial base. We have had massive trade deficits with China increase since joining the World Trade Organization, since we allowed China to join. I believe that's a colossal mistake. I mean, you look at the top 15 steel companies in the world, and the United States doesn't have a single one. 9 of them are in China. How in the world did we allow that to happen as a country? It was a bipartisan mistake for 40 years. And I think on this committee there can be an agreement that we need to start rebuilding the industrial base and reducing the trade deficit with China. I just quickly would love to get a yes or no with all three witnesses. Do you agree that we need to do far more to reduce the trade deficit with China and bring some of these critical industries back home? Secretary, we start with Secretary Ratner, Honorable
Sure.
Ratner.
Congressman, I agree.
Well, Congressman, I would say that absolutely we have to take a range of steps to protect our national security and invest in our sources of strength at home. I think we're doing absolutely that.
And you would agree we have to lower this trade deficit?
Certainly, it's in our interest to lower the deficit. I think more importantly, we should address distortionary economic policies on the part of China, protectionist and discriminatory policies on the part of China, and actions that undermine our economic and national security.
Secretary Kendall?
Particularly on the technology front, returning innovation to America, and I think the CHIPS Act in particular is a really strong example.
Look, I helped write the CHIPS Act, but return innovation to America is a story we've been saying for 40 years while we hollowed out the manufacturing base. I mean, I think we've got to be a little more specific. Let's return steel, let's return manufacturing. We said, we're going to do all the invention, we'll do all the stuff in Silicon Valley. You go to places like Lordstown, Ohio, and they're hollowed out. If I was there, I'd be terribly upset at failed American leadership for 40 years while we just watched as steel left, as aluminum left. I mean, can we make a commitment we're going to start to lower the trade deficit?
I come at this from a national security perspective, but I absolutely know that the Commerce Department wants to work with you and your team on these issues. So let me take that back, and we will continue our good cooperation on this.
I appreciate it. I think that should be a bipartisan metric in terms of what this country needs to do to right the ship. I think the president has been taking efforts there. I think the previous president raised legitimate issues of the hollowing out of American manufacturing base, and it seems to me one thing we can come together on. I did want to commend Secretary Blinken on his recent trip to China and his affirmation of a policy that a Republican initiated, Dr. Kissinger, which was the One China policy. I know he's taken heat for saying that he affirmed that policy and rejected Taiwanese independence, but my view is you can assist Taiwan, as many of us want to, in getting them defense, getting them weapons, but still affirm the One China policy architected by Dr. Kissinger, and my view, Secretary Blinken was appropriate in saying that. Could you comment on that?
Yes, Congressman, there's been absolutely no change to our One China policy. As you know, it's based on the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances to Taiwan. The Secretary in Beijing outlined that policy. He did not say anything new. And I would just, again, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. We will meet our obligations under the Taiwan Relations Act to assist Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense. Our focus is on peace and stability. And maybe one last comment, Congressman.
I just have 25 seconds, so I apologize. I suggest a 4th communique, which is to lower the trade deficit and bring manufacturing home by either president, any president in this country. But I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Congressman. The only comment I was going to add was we absolutely are not pulling our punches in any way, in any way, before these engagements, after them. I think you've seen that over the last 2.5 years. You'll continue to see that going forward, including on our One China policy.
Thank you. Dr. Dunn. Dr. Dunn, you are recognized.
Khanna from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shapley, for being here. I understand you see it as your duty to have the strict enforcement of tax laws. Is it true that you have often disagreed with charging decisions before?
I have agreed with charging decisions before.
I'm saying, is it true that you have often disagreed? Your recommendations have often been disregarded before when it comes to charging decisions. Is that true?
I don't think disregarded is an accurate representation.
They have been, people in your own IRS have disagreed with your decisions often before. Is that accurate?
That's not accurate.
Is it not true that the tax counsel in the criminal department has disagreed often with your decisions in the past?
Oh, criminal tax attorneys?
Yes.
And, you know, as I stated in my...
So how often have they disagreed, in your opinion, with your recommendation decisions?
Very often, criminal tax attorneys, yes.
Can you give us a percentage of how often you've said we ought to charge someone and they've said, no, that may not be a good idea?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, just ballparking a vast majority of what we do, and that's why they're advisory. And
do you have respect for them?
And they're advisory.
Do you have respect for them?
Most prosecutors
It's a simple question, sir. Do you respect those colleagues or not?
Often their opinion is not respected by me
Do you respect
and
them?
prosecutors.
So do you have more respect for them or Mr. Weiss?
I don't.
I just think because you have a history of wanting to charge people and then people pushing back. By your own testimony under oath, you said about 90% of the time people are pushing back on what you want to do. And I'm not questioning. I mean, you are a stickler for the law. You know, it reminds me of Les Mis, and you know the famous person wanted to get the person who had a sandwich. I mean, and then all those times you've got people pushing back on you, and you say, well, they're not very well respected.
Yeah, well,
I mean, do you respect Mr. Weiss?
So the criminal tax attorneys, you know, I've never had a case that they declined, that they did not concur with, that we didn't ignore their request and move forward with the with.
But at 90%, they have disagreed with you, correct? By your own testimony.
Yeah. Yes, I established that, but they're
And
advisory.
let me just ask you on the media. You've given testimony under oath that you have never spoken to the Washington Post, any report on this matter, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know, have you spoken to any media outlet on this matter?
I have spoken after the House Ways and Means Committee.
Before that,
released
have you
testimony.
spoken to any media journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any colleague of yours at the IRS who has spoken to any journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any investigation into the leaks on this matter?
So the October 6th leak, I was the person who referred it to our Inspector General. There was
Do you know
also
any of your colleagues
a
who
leak
are under
on December 9th of 2020, around the day of action.
Do you know if any of
that
your
I
colleagues
know
are
that
under
the IRS
investigation?
Inspector General and DOJ
Sorry, if I could
IG
just
was looking
finish.
into.
Do you know if any of your colleagues are under investigation for that leak?
No, I know of no colleague under investigation for that leak.
And just for the record, then, it is your testimony under oath that you have never spoken to any media person before the House testimony about this matter.
It's not only my testimony under oath today. I provided an affidavit to House Ways and Means Committee stating the same. I've said it to our Inspector General's office as well.
I appreciate that.
also
I
said
just
it,
want to make a final
to
point
the
on
House
this.
Ways
I
and
mean,
Means.
one, I think what...
Mr. Chairman, we mind if I?
Yeah, can the gentleman answer the question you asked, Mr. Khanna?
I just don't want my time to be affected.
If you're granting him the time, Mr. Chairman, but that's
If you give
unusual.
me,
I've never seen
I want a
that.
minute to wrap up. If you want to give him
Okay, you have a minute.
Okay. Here's the point. I think this whole thing, our ranking member Raskin summarized this. I don't disrespect you, sir. I think you have a tough view on what you think the law should be. And this is why we have a prosecutorial system where you don't get to decide, I don't get to decide. We have a whole system. And it turns out that often your recommendations on who should be charged differ from some of the other folks, and that's what's happened in this case. And as your testimony here, you yourself said, you think Mr. Weiss should come and explain his decision. You don't question him. And I think on the optics issue that some of my colleagues have brought up, I mean, obviously, Attorney General Barr is going to be concerned with the optics when you have a Donald Trump-appointed U.S. attorney potentially bringing charges against his rival's son. That's a real legitimate thing to do. So I guess my view here is we're spending hours on a disagreement about whether to charge someone. We have a whole democratic process that does that. You don't get to my final question, Mr. Shapley, do you think you should decide who gets charged, or do you think that should be the charging officer?
So each time you say this is the disagreement, you can say it multiple times. It doesn't make it true. We've testified under oath here about the prosecutors agreeing with charging felony charges on multiple occasions. And just to say this is a disagreement would be a misrepresentation.
My last question, though, who do you think gets to? Do you think you should have that final decision, or a prosecutor should have the final decision?
No, I am a special agent for IRS criminal investigation. I do not make the final decision on whether to charge or not.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, may I have a second? So,
Yes.
in terms of our criminal tax.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, just, are we instituting a new rule in the committee? Because I've
Well,
never seen this happen before.
Okay. I
so-
didn't know if it was to answer, are you finished?
Someone else
Kind of-
can follow
okay.
up. I've
All right,
seen someone
okay.
could say,
Yeah,
give them the
You're
extra time.
correct, rules.
Yep.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, I would like to let the committee and everyone watching at home that parental
I recognize Mr. Khanna from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ween, what drug does Imbruvica, what does it treat?
Congressman, I recognize Imbruvica is one of the products that we do market. I'm not exactly sure.
It's okay. I'm not trying to trick you. It treats leukemia. Do you know what the price that Johnson & Johnson has set for it?
I do not have that on my fingertips.
It's $484 per capsule per tablet, which works out to about $14,000 per month, which works out to about $160,000 per year for leukemia patients. Now, do you know, or I can tell you, how much money, gross revenue, the Johnson & Johnson has made from this drug over the last 10 years?
Congressman, it's not something that I'm an expert at, not something I'm here to testify to today.
$22 billion. Do you know the gross profits of Johnson & Johnson in 2023?
I couldn't tell you that.
$65 billion. So just to recap, you've got a pill for leukemia patients. You sell it at $484 per capsule. That's $160,000 a year. You've made $22 billion over the last 10 years, and you're making $65 billion in profit. Now, we have passed as a Congress, and the President has signed a bill saying, you know what, let Medicare negotiate to try to bring that price down. And you, in your department, because you're Assistant General Counsel, have filed a lawsuit saying that that negotiation would be an unjust taking. Let me ask you this. Do you believe when the Veterans Administration negotiates for drug prices with you that that is a violation of the takings clause?
Congressman, I appreciate the question. The bases for our litigation against HHS with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act are fully disclosed in our complaint. I'm not an expert in this area.
You're the Assistant General Counsel for a company that is accusing the United States government of taking your property because we're negotiating. And you can't answer a simple question about, I'm just a yes or a no. Does the Veterans Affairs negotiation with Johnson & Johnson constitute a taking?
Congressman, we believe that the IRA constrains
No,
medical innovation.
I'm not asking about that area. I'm asking you about, do you believe the Veterans Affairs, when they negotiate, does that constitute a taking?
Congressman, again, that is not a litigation that I have great familiarity
Okay,
with.
so I'll just say you don't want to answer that question. Do you believe when Medicaid negotiates and gets a rebate for anything over the price of inflation, do you believe that that constitutes a taking?
Congressman, again, it's not an area that I specialize in.
I guess I don't understand how, being the Assistant General Counsel, you can come before the United States Congress when you're suing the United States government saying that we are taking your property. I mean, that's a very serious charge. Taking means like if I came as the government with the force, took your property, and you don't know whether it's a taking, when the Veterans Administration negotiates, you don't know whether it's a taking, whether Medicaid negotiates. I assume you'd say it's not a taking, because obviously it's not a taking. These administrations have been negotiating for years, and yet you're arguing that Medicare should, when they negotiate, it's a taking. Medicaid, do you know how many % of the American population is on Medicare?
Congressman, no.
It's 18% about. Do you know how many are on Medicaid?
Congressman, no.
About 18%. So it's not like Medicare has a bigger market. Medicaid negotiates with 18%. Do you know about how much is on, how many of our people are veterans? It's about 6%. So you have already a larger population, when you combine Medicaid and Veterans Affairs, negotiating with your company so that you don't make $65 billion in profits every year, and so leukemia patients don't pay $160,000. You have filed a lawsuit. I think it is shameful what you and the pharmaceutical companies have done in suing the United States government to protect those profits, and you are totally unprepared to answer a single question about what the takings clause is and a justification for that lawsuit.
I mean, I really believe hopefully someone in the company and these other pharmaceutical companies can provide the American people with an explanation why you consider Medicare negotiating those drugs to lower those profits, those obscene profits, a taking when you don't consider that for the Veterans Affairs Administration or Medicaid. Mr. Chairman, I hope someone will answer my questions on that, and I yield back my time.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota for 5 minutes.
Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
The American people are frustrated and exhausted with the corruption and role of big money in the halls of Congress. That is why I'm introducing a 5-point plan. First, ban all PAC and lobbyist money to congressional campaigns. I don't take a dime of it. Second, ban completely stock trading and members of Congress from ever becoming lobbyists. Activists like Unusual Whales, Quiver Quantitative, and the leaders at Crew have been mobilizing for this. Third, term limits for members of Congress. Fourth, term limits for Supreme Court justices. And fifth, an ethics code for Supreme Court justices. This is common sense. The people demand it. It's time we give them back their government and we reform in Washington. We should have bipartisan support for this 5-point plan. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, before the climate summit at the UN, tens of thousands of people marched. I want to tell them, some of us in this building hear you, we see you, and we understand your demand for urgent action. We have seen in my state the wildfires in California. We've seen the flooding in New Hampshire and Vermont. We've seen the hottest summers recorded, and we have seen the smoke-filled air. We need this president to declare a climate emergency. We need to stop the export of our oil to other countries. We need to stop subsidizing fossil fuel companies. We need this president to keep his promise of no new drilling on public lands. That means no to the Willow Project. And we need to stand with the UAW workers who are building EVs to make sure they have a fair wage. Thank you to Gen Z for change. Thank you to Sunrise. Thank you to Climate Defiance. Thank you to all of the groups.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Chair recognizes Ms. Mace from South Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2019, Representative Raskin didn't think a House vote was needed for an actual impeachment inquiry. And to quote Representative Raskin, he said in 2019, there's no formal constitutional or statutory or even the House rule for how an impeachment inquiry is to begin. And so it means different things to different people. I don't want to hear another word from the left or anyone across the other side of the aisle about impeachment inquiry. This is complete and total hypocrisy this morning. Today, we're going to bring the facts. Today, we are going to bring the evidence. In 2017, the Joe Biden family teamed up with Chinese company CEFC to make millions off of granting access to Joe Biden. Hunter even arranged for Joe Biden to share office space with the CCP-aligned company CEFC. My Democrat colleagues say none of this is relevant because Joe Biden wasn't vice president while his family did these shady deals. Turns out that's complete and total bullshit. It's a lie. Hunter Biden referred to access to his father as the keys to his family's only asset. Those words are going to come back and haunt Hunter Biden and his family forever. Yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee released an FBI memo on the interview they had with Tony Bobulinski, a former Biden partner in crime. I'll read a bit of that right now. The work conducted by CEFC, Gilliar, Walker, Hunter Biden, James Biden, and Yee over the preceding 2 years was discussed in detail. In particular, CEFC was closing significant investment deals in Poland, Kazakhstan, Romania, Oman, and the Middle East during this period of time. Period of time is in reference to the years 2015 and 2016, when guess what? Joe Biden was vice president. As an aside, Rob Walker, in previous testimony, also confirmed that Joe Biden attended a meeting with the head of CEFC. So now we know CEFC was working with the Biden family while Joe Biden was vice president. And I'll continue reading from Tony Bobulinski's report, which says, and I quote Bobulinski, Hunter Biden and James Biden did not receive compensation because Joe Biden was still vice president during this time period. There is a concern it would be improper for payments to be made to Hunter Biden and James Biden by CEFC due to its close affiliation with the Chinese government. Hunter Biden and James Biden both wanted to be compensated for the assistance they had provided to CEFC's ventures. In particular, they believe CEFC owed them money for the benefits that accrued to CEFC through its use of the Biden family name to advance their business dealings. The Bidens, coincidentally, were paid over $1 million by CCP-affiliated Chinese company CEFC shortly after Joe Biden left office as vice president. Now we know why, because it was back pay. I'm going to show another image. This is a text message between Hunter Biden and Gong Wendong, an agent of CEFC. Hunter says, my uncle will be here with his brother, in all caps, who would like to say hello to the chairman. He goes on, Jim's brother, if he's coming, wants to say hello. His uncle's brother. I wonder who that could be. I can't quite figure it out. Hunter puts brother in all caps, and it doesn't take a genius to figure this out, but since I'm not always dealing with geniuses, and Washington, D.C. has been illustrated today, I'll spell it out. The brother of Hunter's uncle, Jim, is Joe Biden. Why was Hunter so secretive about his father? I'm going to tell you why. It's because Joe Biden didn't want the American people to know he and his family were getting paid millions and millions of dollars from a company closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party. CEFC knew paying Biden family members was bad, so they covered it up. Hunter knew Joe Biden hanging out with CCP businessmen would be a bad look, so he tried to pull a genius move on us with this whole my uncle's brother bullshit. We already know the president took bribes from Burisma. I also want to add, betraying your country is treason. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this text message between Hunter Biden and Gong Wendong and the FBI memo regarding their interview with Tony Bobulinski, showing Joe Biden's connections to CFC during his vice presidency.
Without objection, so ordered.
Professor Turley, we got 30 seconds. In your experience in reviewing cases of fraud, do people who are conducting legitimate business usually go through these efforts and hoops to keep their foreign entanglements hidden?
Yes, the issue with influence peddling is that it can, in some circumstances, be legal, but it's not something that necessarily is made public. The public does not buy into the idea that you can sell your family brand if it's influence peddling. So what happens with influence peddling is that you often have the commission of crimes that conceal it, and to take steps so that it's not public. That may include, but it's not necessarily the reason in this case, but it may include the failure to pay taxes, the failure to register as a foreign agent. And part of the purpose of an inquiry is to see if there is a linkage between those acts and, more importantly, a linkage to the president. Can I briefly respond to the earlier attack? You may have additional questions. I don't want to take your time.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, the gentlelady's over time.
Okay.
But we'll work with you on that, because I do think you need to respond to that ridiculous statement. Now, Chair recognizes
staff at the State Department, staff at the Homeland Security. First of all, we need people there more than 8 years to understand what's going on in Ukraine and China. I'll tell you something. I have humility. I've been on the Armed Services Committee. I've been there 7 years. I learned so much for the civil servants. And they're not making the millions and billions of dollars in Silicon Valley that some of my constituents are. They're doing this because they love the country. And I just want to...
Individually, they're good people, no doubt about it.
I just want to stand up for them because I know it's popular in terms of demonizing them. And
we're not demonizing them. I think it's really important. I'm not demonizing anybody, because then you get over to the false debate. The question is, can a bureaucracy comprised of good people still be wasteful at a scale that leaves Americans holding the bag? And I do not think it's the job of our federal government to provide employment opportunity for millions. They should actually fill the open jobs in the private sector, reduce the size of that federal bureaucracy by 75%, and I think everybody's going to be better off. And that's not a slight against
One
anybody.
line, Vivek, because you
It's about reviving
you spent in Silicon Valley. One of my favorite leaders in Silicon Valley said, good leaders take people and recruit great people. Great leaders take people and make them great. What we need is presidents who will inspire the
citizens, not the bureaucrats.
federal workforce, and I think they can. We've had great presidents like John F. Kennedy and FDR and Barack Obama. They've seen that talent and they've inspired them, and they're capable of great things for the
The next topic you guys wanted to get into was climate. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Ramaswamy. There was a recent poll from Yale and George Mason, by the way, that found that Republican views on climate are shifting, and now 1 out of 3 Republicans think that climate change should be declared a national emergency. Are they right or wrong?
I'm not one of those 3 Republicans. I disagree.
1 out of 3. Yeah.
So I believe facts matter here. Okay, are global surface temperatures going up? Yes, they are. Is that likely owed to some man-made causes? Likely. However, this is not an existential risk for humanity, and to the contrary, 8 times as many people are going to die this year of cold temperatures rather than warm ones. In the 1970s, the warning of climate change was an ice age. Look at the cover of Newsweek. Today, they warn the other direction. I want to think about the climate disaster-related death rate. The number of people who dies from tornadoes, heat waves, and so on. Down by 98% over the last century. Why? Owing to fossil fuels. The Earth is more covered by green surface area coverage today than it was a half century or a century ago. Why? Because carbon dioxide is plant food. So what we have to do is confront the facts and ask ourselves, are the climate change policies hurting us more than climate change itself? And I think they are. And so my view is that, yes, we should ask what advances human prosperity, human flourishing. Don't ask what minimizes our impact on the climate. Ask what impacts human prosperity, even in the face of a lot of changing circumstances, including the climate itself. And that means using more of all American-made energy, including fossil fuels such as oil and natural gas, and I will not apologize for that.
Are we facing a national emergency?
We are. Human flourishing requires a livable planet. That's the premise of human flourishing. We need a planet. Originally, when we were going to have this conversation, I was going to come in with all these scientific facts, and then one of the young folks on my team said, bro, you don't have to convince people in New Hampshire that climate change is real, or that it's an existential threat. You all know. You saw the floods in New Hampshire and Vermont. This is not anecdotal, by the way. I've heard you say anecdotal data. The American Scientific has shown through computer modeling that this is extreme weather events are the cause of increasing temperatures. You know what it'll do to New Hampshire. You know what it'll do to tourism here. You think New Hampshire skiing is going to be around? You know what it'll do to dairy farming and productivity. You know what it'll do to your electricity bills. People saw what it did in Maui. I mean, we don't have to convince the American people that climate change is a major threat. If you're a data person, read Deloitte's report, $14 trillion. But here's what I don't understand today. First of all, we have the record oil production right now under President Biden. That's just a fact. So what policies are we talking about that have impacted adversely? We've got record, actually, oil production because the IRA hasn't even started to be implemented. And let me just finish with this one point. All I'm saying is we can disagree, but maybe we can disagree. You probably want more fossil fuel infrastructure than I do. I want to stop the export of our oil. But can you at least acknowledge this, that we should be open in a $9 trillion energy market to innovation, and if we can come up with new technology that is cleaner and that is better, why not? And why would we want all of that to go to China? Look, I'm open to some forms of nuclear, but you keep saying nuclear, nuclear, nuclear. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says it can be about 20%, and most of it right now is not economical. So here's, I guess, my question. Why do you have a problem with America also leading in solar, in wind, in clean forms of energy? Why would
I do, and I think that there's an opportunity here for innovation. I love innovation. We've had innovation within oil production. Natural gas and fracking, horizontal drilling was a great source of American innovation that's been a source of prosperity to Americans and people around the world to whom we export natural gas. But the real opponents to innovation are the ones who are opposed to natural gas, which absolutely I consider a clean form of energy. I've developed 5 FDA-approved medicines. I love innovation. So that's actually not accurate, Ro. I think it's a lot of the mistaken policies. Here's my issue with the climate change agenda. It has nothing to do with the climate, actually. And I can prove that to you. The same people who will howl about reducing carbon emissions, Scope 3 emissions caps in the United States, say nothing as we're literally shifting those same projects to places like China. Chevron is dropping projects that are literally being bought up by PetroChina on the other side of the world. Last time I checked, it was supposed to be global warming. I'll give you one more fact, because I have read the science on this. So, trained as a molecular biologist back in the day, so I'll tell you this. Even if you subscribe to the core tenets of this movement, methane leakage is 80 times worse for global warming than is a unit of carbon dioxide. Methane leakage is worse in China than it is here. So not only is it net neutral, it's arguably worse even if you subscribe to the tenets of this worldview. And I do think it is hypocritical that many of the opponents of fossil fuels are also the biggest opponents of nuclear energy, which is the greatest form of carbon-free energy production known to man. That comes back to the administrative state. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, since it was created, we have not seen the creation or the construction of a new nuclear power plant in the U.S. The only country in the world that has a Gen 4 nuclear reactor is actually China. So this is hypocrisy all the way down. And I think that we have to ask the question of what advances American flourishing, and what advances American flourishing will advance human flourishing, rather than measuring one metric of carbon emissions in the atmosphere.
Very quickly, you know, the President Biden, the Inflation Reduction Act and infrastructure bill actually gives a lot of money to develop nuclear technology and actually helps expedite the permitting. If you read the bill,
Which is a net waste as long as you have the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that stops it.
No, it actually is. It calls for reform of the commission. The problem isn't the regulatory. I mean, it's easy. It's easy to just say, "Oh, the problem is it's bureaucrats." The problem is the economics.
Bro, I'll give you just a couple facts here. Let me good facts you'll like.
The problem is the economics, and I guess my point is they're Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, President Biden, myself, there are a lot of people who believe in climate change who are open to nuclear. And tomorrow if we had fusion, you know, Elon Musk says we have fusion, it's called the sun, why don't we just capture it? If we had fusion, great. We've been chasing that holy grail for 50 years. I'm for, let's develop all of the alternatives. And I don't see why that's...
I'm not against that. I'm not against developing an alternative.
That's what President Biden's
getting in the way. And just a fact on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because I think this could be useful in Washington, D.C. if you're able to take this fact back. 3 to 5 years was the time it took to construct a new nuclear power plant before the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. That's how long it takes in places like Japan and France today. After that body was created, it's 25 to 40 years. That is to say, impossible in the United States of America. That's not because you all elected congressmen who voted for that policy. It's because somebody who was never elected decided that we don't want nuclear energy in the United States. And so a lot of this agenda has nothing to do with the climate. It is about flogging ourselves in what has become a modern cult, apologizing for our modern way of life. And as your next president, I will not. And I think that's what it's going to take to actually revive this country.
Here's what I already give you 1 minute. We're running out of time. All right. I want to get to the future of America. Okay. There's the last topic you guys wanted to address. What do you fantasize America looking like in 2050? By 2050, Texas will be the largest populated state in the country. It will be a minority country, multi-ethnic. Clearly, obviously, I want to note that we have 2 Indian Americans on the stage. American Indians, probably would be a better way of putting it. And say with Kamala Harris, and obviously with Haley in the race at the top of national politics. Asians are the fastest growing segment of the population in the United States. What, you're obviously keeping polarized, what does the future of America look like? I believe the question goes, if you had your way.
I'm very hopeful about the future of America. I'm hopeful when I see the young people. I'm hopeful when I think of my own life story. You know, when I was growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, my parents could not have met a staff member to a member of Congress. Today, there are 5 South Asians in the United States Congress. This is a country of progress. But you know what I think we need over the next 10, 20 years? We need an American production renaissance. If we revitalize our economy in this country, if we bring back the new steel that's also going to have lower carbon footprint, if we bring back the modern aluminum production, if we bring new technology jobs to historically black colleges, historically institutes, if we bring economic opportunity to every community so they can build wealth and people can live in places they love, that can make us a preeminent economic leader in which everyone has a stake. And I want for every American the chance this country gave Vivek and I. That's it. You know, I came, my parents weren't poor, they were middle class. My dad was an engineer, my mom was a substitute school teacher. but I could go to a dentist, I could get health care, I could go to a good public school. I had to take out too many loans. I got lucky. I went to Silicon Valley and, did well, had a good wife whose father did well. But I had the basics. Why can't we do that in this country? Why can't we have child care at $10 a day, Medicare for all, free public college? They say, how are you going to pay for it? Reverse Reagan, Trump, Bush tax cuts. Put that money in giving working and middle-class families a shot at the American dream. That's how we bring this country together.
So I think that I'm glad to hear that we also may share at least a longer run, bright future for America, even if we disagree about the paths that get us there. We're taught to believe in both parties right now that we're this nation in decline, right? That we're at the end of the ancient Roman Empire and all we have left is to fight over the scraps of a shrinking pie. I don't think we have to be ancient Rome. The way I see this as a nation, and I say this as a young person, as a nation, I think we're really just a little young right now. Actually, going through our version of adolescence. We're going through hard times. I'm not going to come here and tell you it's morning in America. It's not. But it can be again. I think we can still be a nation in our ascent. And the way we're going to get there is by reviving this thing we call merit in the United States of America. What is merit? Each of us has God-given gifts. They're not the same. Each of us on the stage, in the audience, each of us has different God-given gifts. But America's the country on earth that allows you to achieve the maximum of your God-given potential without anybody standing in your way. So what's my dream for 2050? That we'll tell our kids and our grandkids that the United States of America is still the nation where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is, in some of our cases, that you still get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. And yes, that is the American dream.
What do you want a polarized America to take away from this past hour?
So it's interesting. I think we have celebrated our diversity and our differences for so long that we actually forgot all of the ways that we're really the same as Americans, bound by a common set of ideals, right? We both have the same shade of melanin up here on this stage. So what is actually my answer to that question, unless our diversity can be a beautiful thing, but it only matters if there's something greater that unites us across that diversity. Without that, we're just a bunch of two-legged higher mammals walking some geographic space that we call a country, do what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. That's not America. America is a vision of what that place can be. E pluribus unum means from many, one. And I believe those ideals still exist. Even though I disagree with my friend here on a lot of things, I believe that in his heart, and the people who he represents, the people who voted for him even, share those basic ideals in common. We might disagree on corporate tax rates or whatever. Those are details. But we agree on the basic rules of the road: meritocracy, free speech, the pursuit of excellence, self-governance over aristocracy. I think most of us in this country do. I'm calling the bluff on the artificial myth of national division. Those of you in the audience are not nearly as divided as the media in the back of this room would teach you to believe that you are. We still share the ideals of the American Revolution in common. But now it's up to us to move just beyond celebrating diversity and differences to celebrate those ideals that unite us. That is why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm optimistic that we will succeed. So thank you.
Machiavelli never criticized those who have a pen. But, but let me thank you, Vivek, because you've lived up to your terms of keeping this as a civil conversation. I think we need to do more. It was a risk for you to do this running, and I appreciate your engagement. James, thank you. I guess where I would say is that I don't think it's history started with you or me, Vivek, and I have the same aspiration, but I also recognize the struggles of race and the struggles of people who have fought for that more perfect union. If we were going to teach history properly in America, and one reason we should, and some of you have heard me say this, I would lead with a speech by Frederick Douglass called Composite Nation. In 1869, Frederick Douglass, after 20 years of being enslaved, chooses not to speak out for black Americans. He chooses to speak out for Chinese Americans in 1869. And he says, I believe in the free air of America. People can come from all different backgrounds, all different faiths, all different cultures, and we will become a composite nation. Since then, we've had the internment of Japanese Americans, we've had the civil rights movement, we've had Bhagat Singh thing where people like Vivek and I weren't even allowed to be citizens, we've had our parents not being able to come here, we've had profiling of Arab Americans after 9/11, but we've continued to make progress. And here's what I say to young people, we have come too far to turn back. We have come too far to turn back. When I look at the young people in Congress, Delia Ramirez, Maxwell Frost, Jasmine Crockett, it gives me hope. When I looked at this young generation, it gives me hope. Our work is hard, but our work is to vindicate Douglas's vision of becoming a cohesive multiracial democracy. And the more conversations like this that we have, the better shot we have of doing that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.